Hello everyone, welcome to KnowledgeIndia once again. In this particular video, we want to talk about AWS Data Transfer Charges. There are a couple of questions which I'll present here in front of you. What is the data transfer charge when traffic flows between two EC2 instances? Now the scenario could be that they are there in the same availability zone, or they are there in the different availability zone but within a region, or it could be that these instances are there in different region altogether. What's the data transfer charges between EC2 instance and an S3 bucket if they are there in the same region? Another scenario could be, what about data transfer charges between an EC2 instance and an RDS instance? And how does it change if it's a multi-AZ RDS instance? Does it make sense to have NAT gateways in all the VPCs in your organization, or you should go ahead and put it into a central VPC? Now, if you are clear about the data transfer charges in all these scenarios, then you can just leave this video here. Otherwise, please follow along. Okay, so let's talk about the data transfer charges in terms of EC2 instances first. And if you understand this, you will be able to relate this to other AWS services which are typically instance based. For example, you take RDS, you take Redshift, you take Elasticache. All of these services are actually instance-based services. What does that mean? It means that these services ultimately would be running some sort of VM type of resource, and they consume an elastic network interface from your VPC, right? So you will always be able to see the ENI for these services in your VPC dashboard, right? So let's understand the data transfer between them first. So what about the data transfer charges if the traffic is flowing to Amazon EC2 instance from internet, right? So let's say you have an EC2 instance, you go ahead and you downloaded, let's say 10 GB of some heavy file from internet to your EC2 instance. For that, the charges would be zero. You do not get charged when traffic flows from internet to your EC2 instance, right, as such. But when the scenario changes, let's say if the traffic has to go out from your EC2 instance to internet, then there is a charge. So think about you're having an EC2 instance and you have hosted a website on that, right? Or let's say you have kept some files on your EC2 instance and people are accessing those files from internet, right? From your EC2 instance. So the traffic flow is happening from your EC2 instance to the internet, right? So in that case, there will be a transfer out charges, and the charges differ, of course. Like if you are sending a lot of data, then you start getting lower charges, right? But let's say for the first 10 TB per month, it will be 0.09 per GB. It differs from region to region, but the idea is not to remember these numbers. The idea is to understand the concept, right? So this is simple. When the traffic comes from internet to EC2 and then traffic goes from EC2 to internet. I hope this is quite easy. Let's try and understand what happens when traffic goes from an EC2 to certain other services, right? So let's say, let's extend the example which we were discussing. You have a website which you have hosted on an EC2 instance. Let's say you have a server side type of website, an ASP.NET website which you have hosted on an EC2 instance, right? So the traffic has to go out from your EC2 instance to internet, of course. So if it is directly going out to internet, we have understood the charges here. But let's say you are making use of CloudFront, right? So what happens is when the traffic goes from your EC2 instance to CloudFront, for that the charges would be zero. There's no charge for traffic flowing from your EC2 instance to CloudFront. But if the traffic is flowing from your EC2 instance to some other region, let's say you have your EC2 first instance in the Ohio region, and you have another instance, let's say in Singapore region, for example. So the traffic flow because it is happening from your Ohio instance, there is a data transfer out charge on your EC2 instance, right? So that's something to know. So we understood about cross region. Let's try and understand what happens when it is within the same region, right? Which is quite important. So within the same region, now we have to discuss about within availability zones. So we'll try and understand that what happens when the traffic goes between different availability zones and within the same availability zone. So in first case, let's say data is transferred in to and out from public or elastic IP version 4 address is charged at this rate. So you have got two EC2 instances, right? You've got two EC2 instances in availability zone A, another one in availability zone B, and traffic flow happens between them. There is a charge if it is using a public IP, right? There is a charge. Then you may ask, what if we use a private IP? Even when you use private IP, but if your instances are there in two different availability zones within the same region, there will be charge of 0.01 per GB. You can see here data transfer in and out from EC2, RDS, Redshift, all of these instance-based services, right? Or even over the peering. Connections across availability zones in the same AWS region is charged at this rate in each direction. So if you have an EC2 instance in availability zone A and an EC2 instance in availability zone B, the traffic on the first instance, there will be a data out charge. On the second instance, there will be a data in charge, right? And on both of those, it will be 0.01 per GB. So overall, you still pay 0.02 per GB. So please understand that part. The traffic flow between two instances across AZs, there is a charge, be it public IP or be it on private IP. In which scenario you do not get charged? If the traffic flow is happening between two EC2 instances which are there in the same availability zone, then there is no charge. Okay, so let's summarize this part. When the instances are there in the same AZ, it will be free if they are using private IP. Even when they are there in the same AZ, if they have public IP and they are transferring data over public IP, there will be a charge. If they are using private IP, and that's what makes sense, it will be free. When they are there in the different AZs, but within a region, it will be charged whether the instances are using public IP or private IP. The key thing you have to remember here is the traffic is flowing from one AZ to another AZ. Whenever traffic flows from one AZ to another AZ within a region, there will be a charge. The third one is when let's say two instances are there in two different regions, then what happens? On the first instance from where data out is happening, on that instance, there will be a charge, right? For data out charges will be there. But the other instance where data in is happening, because it is happening from internet, there won't be any charge. And hence the data in or transfer in will be free. Okay, the next thing which we wanted to discuss was what's the data transfer charges between EC2 instance and S3 bucket if they are there in the same region. So the short answer is it will be free, right? You can transfer as much data as you want between an EC2 instance and an S3 bucket if they are there in the same region. Why so? Because if you remember the S3 architecture, S3 as a service keeps your data across multiple availability zones within a region, right? So let's say even if you go ahead and create one bucket, internally S3 service is keeping the data which you put on that bucket across 3 availability zones, at minimum 3 availability zones within that region. So what happens is, let's say within US East 1, just for example, within US East 1, you have your EC2 instance in the US East 1A, and you have your bucket in the US East 1 region, right? So internally, if you think, there is a presence of your bucket in the US East 1A availability zone as well, right? So because of that, the data transfer charges between EC2 and S3, that is kept free. There is no internet access involved, right? When your EC2 instance and S3 both are there in the same region, traffic is not going via internet. It is there within your region, and that too, because of this architecture, it also remains within your AZ as well. So because of that, there are no data transfer charges. You can verify that as well here. It is free. So you need to understand that in certain architectures where you have got let's say a lot of data files stored in S3, and many of the times you just want to take that data to an EC2 instance in order to process it. So the times when your S3 and EC2 both are there in the same region, how much ever GBs or TBs you transfer, there won't be any data transfer charges. Okay, so that's a good strategy. And that's why many of the times what people do is people actually keep their data files in S3 bucket, right? Any sort of big data files which they have, they will keep it on S3, and they can bring those files, or they can transfer those files to EC2 instances in any availability zones, right, within a region, and they can do the processing, and still they do not incur any data transfer charges. So remember, if you transfer the data between two different instances which are there in two different availability zones, there is a charge. But you transfer the data between an EC2 instance and an S3 bucket, there is no charge. Okay, remember that they should be there in the same region. So next question is that what about data transfer charges between EC2 instances and an RDS instance, right? So the first scenario could be very simple to understand. If your EC2 instance and RDS instance both are just one instances and they are in the same AZ, then there is no charge, of course. But if your EC2 instance and your RDS instance are there in different availability zones, there will be a data transfer charge. Same way as you have two EC2 instances and two different availability zones, same way you will have charge between your EC2 and RDS as well if they are there in different availability zones. Now, if you think about multi-AZ RDS, right? So here is a good diagram for you to understand. Let's say you have an application, and in your application you are running auto scaling group. So because of auto scaling group, you will have at minimum 2 instances, or maybe 4, 6 or 10 instances running, and you are using a multi-AZ RDS. So if multi-AZ RDS, it means you will have 2 RDS instances. One would be primary, one would be standby, let's say. So what happens is, in case of multi-AZ RDS, all the requests are always answered by the primary node or the primary instance, right? So if you actually see here, what happens is the EC2 instance in availability zone 2 is also sending traffic to this one, and the EC2 instance in availability zone 1 is also sending traffic to the same RDS primary node, right? So because of this, what happens is that there is at least traffic flowing between availability zones always, at least in one case, right? In this scenario, for this particular instance, the traffic is going across AZs, right? It is going from availability zone 1 to availability zone 2. So in this case, there will be data transfer charges. In this scenario, there are no data transfer charges. Okay, so you have to understand that when you are using multi-AZ RDS and you also have your EC2 instances spanning across multiple availability zones, you will be incurring some amount of data transfer charges for sure, right? Because in order to follow the principle of high availability, you would be spanning your EC2 instances across multiple availability zones, and even for your multi-AZ RDS, you will have your instances in multiple availability zones. So because of that, it will happen that traffic will flow across AZs. So that's one thing. Another question which many times people think is, in case of multi-AZ RDS, there is a replication happening from the primary node to the secondary node or to the standby node. So is there a data transfer charge for that as well, because the traffic is flowing from one AZ to another AZ? The answer is no. When you go for a multi-AZ RDS instance, as part of the service, the replication charges are included, right? So you still pay for the, based on the size of your RDS instance, you will be paying a certain charge for compute, you can say. And then based on the storage which you choose and the type of storage which you choose, there is a storage charge, right? And in addition to this, you pay the data transfer charges. But in order to do the replication, to make sure that the standby instance has all the data in place, for that, how much ever data transfer happens, you don't have to pay for it separately. That comes inbuilt as part of the service. So you don't have to calculate or worry for that separately. Okay, I hope that is clear. The last one which we want to discuss is, does it make sense to have NAT gateways in all the VPCs in your organization? So what are the factors on which the pricing depends for a NAT gateway? The first one is standing charges, you can say, right? So as soon as you create a NAT gateway, there is a per hour charge which you have to pay. Doesn't matter you are using it or not, right? Doesn't matter whether you use it or not, right? Once you have created the NAT gateway, you continuously pay those standing charges. And the second type is the data processing charges, right? The amount of data which flows against or which flows from the NAT gateway, you pay for that, right? Which is like something X per GB, let's say. So depending on the amount of traffic which goes via your NAT gateway, you pay for it. Now, one important thing to understand here is, of course, this one, the second one is dependent on the amount of traffic which flows, right? But the first one is a fixed charge, right? Let's say if it is $1 per hour, for example, it will remain $1 per hour. Doesn't matter you are passing 10 GB per hour from that NAT gateway, or you are passing 100 GB per hour from that NAT gateway. The first one just remains fixed, right? Your NAT gateway internally scales, right? If let's say a lot of traffic is flowing via your NAT gateway internally scales. But just because your NAT gateway is scaling up, AWS doesn't like increase your standing charges, right? That just remains fixed. So think about this. If you have, let's say, 50 VPCs or 50 accounts in your organization, and you have got, let's say, just in simple terms, let's say you have got 30 VPCs there, right? If you go ahead and put NAT gateways in all the 30 VPCs, and of course following the principle of HA, you will put at least 2 NAT gateway, right, in every VPC. So what happens? You will end up having at least 13 to 2, 60 NAT gateways, right? Or if your organization is doing, let's say, like is following the topology of 3 availability zones per VPC, then it becomes 13 to 3, which means 90 NAT gateways, right? So doesn't matter how much traffic is going through, you will surely pay standing charges for 90 NAT gateways. Now think about this. If there are let's say 15 VPCs which actually are not sending that much of traffic out to internet, then what happens? You are unnecessarily paying the standing charges for the NAT gateways in those VPCs, but actually good amount of traffic is not going out. So you are in loss there, right? So most of the times it makes sense to actually send all the traffic from your VPCs to a central VPC and then send it out from there via single NAT gateway or via NAT gateways in a single VPC, multiple NAT gateways, but within a single VPC. That works better because you are able to bring all the traffic to a central VPC. You can do all sort of filtering, inspection, etc. on that traffic, and then you can send the stuff out. Right now, if we get into the details of it, there can be other scenarios where maybe sending it all to a central VPC may cost a lot. So that's a different thing to discuss. But most of the times it makes a lot of sense to actually bring all your traffic centrally to one VPC and then send it out via NAT gateways in one VPC, instead of going ahead and creating NAT gateways in each and every VPC. You will end up paying a lot of money for NAT gateways itself. Okay, so those were the questions which we covered in this particular video. I hope it made some sense and you were able to understand the explanation. If you have any questions or something is not clear, go ahead and put a comment below and we will try to answer that as soon as possible. I'll also leave a couple of links for you in the video description, which you can go ahead and read, and there are some good articles which will help you in understanding this further. AWS Data Transfer Charges is one such thing which is often not understood very well by people, and hence they end up with bill shocks, right? When bill comes, they realize, oh my God, I don't know why that much money is going. So it's really important to understand these aspects and bring this into your architecting, right? When you are architecting a solution, think about all these aspects and then design your solution. So I hope you liked it. If you did, go ahead, just like it, share it with someone. If you really liked it, if you did not like it, no problem. Take care and we'll meet again with the next video.